Hello there. I'm recording this program as the election year approaches. We are having a lot of hopes on the Genesis. We are arguing that they will transform the voting behavior. The question is, will Wanjiku vote differently in line with the Genesis? But before I answer that question, I would like us to look at the possible reasons why Wanjiku votes the way she votes. The title of this video is The Architecture of Solidarity Redefining Wanjiku's Voting Behavior Through the Sweet Sobs. Sweet sobs is a concept in my book, Women's Response, Sweet Sobs, Women's Response to Anthropine, which I published in 2019. It's based on 8 women who have been grassroots leaders in Gatodo North. But I'll focus on one woman, Nyokafiwa Mwema, and I wish to express gratitude to his son, who was my schoolmate, Mwaliama, or Gushe, as we used to call him while we were at Ngedo Primary School, who allowed me to interview the mother about her experiences and her role as a woman trader, as a grassroots organizer, and a mother. And through her, I reflect the possible drivers of the voting behavior of other women whom we refer to as Wanjiku. I wish to acknowledge that Nyokafi had a disability which was incurred when she had a bus accident at Kahawasukari in 1965 while taking goods to Marigiti Market in Nairobi in a bus which was then known as Munyororoka. Since then, Nyokafi continued trade after recovery. She continued trading in the market. The reason I chose her as a leader is because she showed that one can lead even their own body and resist any obstacles to pursue their goal. That's why I'm focusing on her. The next rider that I'll add is that Gatodo North is one constituency which is known that most of its leaders always serve one term. It's rare to find a leader elected a second term. So it's a constituency that we need to focus on and look at the reasons why the constituents become disgruntled so quickly and then move to another leader. And I'll begin the discussion under my video brand name, Ugewe Bereahinya, Knowledge is Beyond Strength, by looking at the architecture of solidarity, redefining Wanjiku's voting behavior through sweet sobs as reflected in the life of Nyokafi Mwema. This paper challenges the dominant framing of the Kenyan common woman Wanjiku as an irrational or easily manipulated voter, drawing on my concept of anthropine, which is human-inflicted suffering born of structural violence, and the sweet sob, the communal expression of grief that generates resilience and solidarity. In the book, The Sweet Sob of Women in Response to Andro Pain, I argue that Wanjiku's voting behavior is better understood as architecture of solidarity. The video focuses on Nyokafiwa Mwema, a character whose experience of disability and systemic neglect illuminates the strategic logic of the marginalized voter by analyzing 3 pillars of Wanjiku's political agency. 1. Reciprocity. 2. Mitigation of andro pain. And 3. Communal consensus. The video redefines the vote as a defense architectural choice, an attempt to protect the informal networks of care that sustain life in the face of a failed social contract. You will note that Wanjiku is not a remnant. He's a continuation of the women through colonial, post-colonial, neo-colonial, new millennium women who have been subject of marginalization. So we have to note that majority of them were involved, their mothers and grandmothers were involved in the colonial struggle. They have been involved in resisting neoliberalism, and they have fought many battles. So they are not just lazy, they are resilient, and they know what they do. The figure Wanjiku occupies a central yet deeply contested space in the Kenyan political imagination. Coined during the constitutional reform debates of the 1990s, the name was intended to represent the common person, the grassroots citizen whose interest should anchor the democratic governance. However, in the decades since, Wanjiku has frequently been rendered in academic and journalistic discourse as an irrational, easily manipulated actor, a woman whose political agency can be purchased for a price of a salt pack, a packet of unga, a few hundred shillings, or who is blindly collared into ethnic silos by political kingpins. This narrative serves as an exclusionary purpose. It abdicates state responsibility. If the voter is irrational, the chaos of the nation is presented as Wanjiku's fault. In my work, I offer a radical rebuttal to this reductionism through the narrative of Nyokafiwa Mwema. I shift the analytical gaze from the polling station to the domestic sanctuary, the garden of the marketplace. I reveal that Wanjiku is not a passive recipient of political direction, but a strategic actor navigating a predatory state. The video focuses on Nyokafiwa Mwema for 3 reasons. First, her experience of disability illuminates the layered nature of andro pain, the human-inflicted suffering that results from systematic neglect more sharply than other challenges might. Second, her dependence on communal networks of care makes the architecture of solidarity visible in ways that more independent characters would not. Third, Nyokafi provides rich material for analyzing how marginalization sharpens rather than diminishes political discernment. The video proceeds as follows. Section 2 defines anthropane and sweet sob as an analytical concept. Section 3 examines Nyokavi's lived experience to show how anthropane shapes political consciousness. Section 4 analyzes the liturgy of sweet sobs as a tool for political discernment. Section 5, the three pillars of Wanjiku voting behavior: reciprocity, mitigation of anthropane, communal consensus. Section 6 concludes with implications of how we understand democratic participation in conflict in context of structural neglect. Before examining voting behavior, we must establish the central concept, anthropane. Anthropane is defined as the specific form of suffering inflicted by fellow human beings through systemic failures, structural violence, and interpersonal cruelty. It's not a natural disaster or an act of God. It is the deliberate byproduct of social exclusion, economic marginalization, and the invisibility of the informal worker. Manifestations of anthropane. Manifestations of anthropane occur in several ways. First, there is the economic violence, which manifests as the struggle of families who cannot afford basic necessities due to systemic neglect. Second, physical and social trauma takes the form of extreme acts of violence that leave lasting psychological scars on individuals and communities. Third, institutional negligence appears in the failure of systems meant to protect systems, such as patients dying in hospitals due to lack of resources or the sole response of state security to crime. Fourth, domestic and gender-based suffering encompasses the intimate pain of betrayal, abuse, or abandonment, including women driven to self-harm due to domestic violence or infidelity or indebtedness. These manifestations are not mutually exclusive. They overlap and compound one another, creating the layered, pervasive atmosphere of anthropane that defines Wanjiku's daily existence. The sweet sob is a term for the paradoxical response to anthropane. On the surface, a sob is a sign of defeat. But for women like Nyokafi, the sob is sweet for two reasons. First, it's communal rather than isolated. When women sob together, they recognize each other's pain, transforming private trauma into shared strength. Second, it is generative. The sob clears emotional space for hope, becoming the precursor to mutual networks, chama, saving groups, and what this paper calls the architecture of solidarity. Nyokafi wa Mwema embodies the layered experience of anthropine. She navigates the world of a woman as an informal worker and as a person with a disability. This intersectionality creates a unique anatomy of pain that informs every political choice she makes. The invisibility of labor. The first component of Nyokavi's anthropine is the invisibility of labor. Traditional economic metrics cannot capture the work she performs in the spaces between the kitchen garden, the marketplace, and the communal spaces that she occupies. These spaces are the actual engines of the Kenyan society, yet they are systematically ignored by formal accounting. Nokafi's labor is foundational. She ensures her family is fed when formal supply chains fail. She provides the care economy that keeps the labor force healthy. Yet because this work happens in domestic and informal spheres, it is, it is treated as natural rather than economic. The state extracts her energy by failing to provide basic infrastructure, water, electricity, accessible roads, forcing her to spend hours performing survival labor. When she trades in the market, she does so without the protection of labor laws or insurance. Her office can be swept away by a municipal bulldozer any moment. When Nyokabi votes, she carries this invisibility with her. Her voting behavior is a demand for visibility, a political reality where her domestic architecture is recognized as a site of natural value. Structural neglect. The second component is structural neglect. Nyokavi lives in the void left by failed social contract, starting with colonialism, post-colonial state, the post 2010 constitution, and now the current government. In a functioning democracy, the state provides a safety net. In Nyokavi's world, she's the safety net because of absence of institutional support. She has been forced to become her own healthcare provider, navigating illnesses without affordable clinics. Teacher supplementing crumbling public education with fireside knowledge, and financial managing microcredit through chamas because of the predatory banking system. This structural neglect is not an inconvenience, it is a form of violence. It places the entire weight of political survival on Nukavi's shoulders. When she approaches the police station, she's not looking for a visionary manifesto. She's looking for reprieve, a candidate who might lighten the load of being her own state. The logic of no. Yokavi's voting behavior is profoundly rational, though it operates on a logic that Kudit rarely understand. Her vote is rooted in historical and visceral memory. She does not need a political scientist report on state capture to know when she's being exploited. She feels it in her bones. Yokafi remembers the politician who stood by her in the market, who stood by or the market was grabbed. She remembers those who promised a ramp for accessibility. but delivered only a photo op. If a candidate represents the same structures that have historically ignored her domestic architecture, her response is resolute no. This no is the political manifestation of the sweet soul, a rejection of leadership that treats her as a demographic to be managed rather than a citizen to be served. The liturgy of the sweet soul as political discernment. The sweet soul is not merely an emotional reaction. It's a liturgical act, a repetitive, communal, and sacred expression of existence in the face of anthropine. For Nyokavi, the sob serves as both lament and defiance. It is the scaffolding upon which a political agency is built, the duality of the sob. To the outsider, a sob is a sign of defeat, but it has a profound duality. The sob is sweet because it's shared. When your coffee sits with other women in the marketplace or the charmer, their shared lamentation breaks the silence of invisibility. In this space, your coffee is not a woman with a disability or an informal trader to be managed. She's a sister whose pain is validated by the collective. The sob is also sweet because it is generative. By focalizing her anthropine, Nyokafi clears emotional space to build what comes next. The sob generates the hope necessary for survival. It is the precursor to the architect of solidarity, the merry-go-rounds, the mutual aid networks that provide the material state the state refuses to offer. The sob as a political barometer. Politicians are masters of mimicking the sob. They arrive during election cycles, deploying the language of empathy, simulating a shared experience with the marginalized. They adopt the labels of Mamba Boga, market women, and hustlers, attempting to wear the struggles of the informal trader like a campaign garment. However, Nyokafi possesses a high degree of political discernment born of her daily practice of care. Because she lives the reality of anthropy, she can distinguish between a politician's performance of empathy and the actual substance of care. She recognizes the bitter performance of the populist whose policies continue to extract from the informal sector. She searches for the sweet possibility of a leader whose history suggests genuine acknowledgement of the domestic sphere. And if this leader is not available, then the logical solution is to get the salt, then the packet of flour, or the few shillings and vote, voting as an act of defense. For Nyokafi, voting is a public manifestation of this discernment. Her ballot is a strategic move to protect the spaces of sweetness she has carved out. If a politician's past actions have intensified the bitterness of her life through the demolition of markets, the neglect of accessibility infrastructure, or the corruption of healthcare, her sob remains a resolute no. She votes for preservation of the charmer, the safety of the market, and the dignity of home. Her voting behavior is a demand for politics of empathy, a political environment that allows a communal aspect to flourish, redefining the vote. Traditional analysis of Kenyan election relies on top-down metrics, ethnic balkanization, big man politics, the transactional clientelism. Nukahi's lived experience demands bottom-up reconceptualization. From her narrative, we can extract three pillars of Wanjiku's voting behavior. Pillar 1, reciprocity and the validation of informal spaces. The first pillar is reciprocity. In formal political discourse, reciprocity is often misunderstood as voter bribery, one-time exchange of a vote for a t-shirt or a small sum of money. Yokasvi's life reveals a deeper, more structural form of exchange. For Nyokavi, a candidate's worth is measured by the recognition of the informal sector legitimacy. Reciprocity here is not about a gift, it's about a social contract that respects the spaces of sweetness she has built. She asks, does this candidate recognize the market stall is a site of economic dignity? Do they understand that the home is not just a residence, but a production center? If a candidate has historically facilitated the demolition of stores, ignored the lack of accessibility for people with disability, the architecture of the marketplace has been violated. Nyokavi's vote is a strategic investment in leaders who promise to leave our informal structures intact. It is a demand for a state that gives back infrastructure, safety, and respect as much as it takes in taxes and labor. Pillar 2, mitigation of anger pain. The ballot is a shield. The second pillar is mitigation of anger pain. For Nyokavi, the state is often a source of bitterness. The entity that fails to provide medicine, clean water, or accessible infrastructure, her voting behavior is fundamentally defensive. She does not vote for grand abstractions like national development. She votes to reduce the immediate ache in her life. Her ballot is a shield rather than a sword. She uses it to fend off the most predatory aspect of the state. She's not looking for utopia. She's looking for a reprieve. The sweet soap is a collective recognition of shared pain. And the fourth is the collective attempt to apply balm to the wound. If the current regime has made the sweetness of a mother's dream impossible through rising costs and neglected services or allowing alcoholism to thrive like in Gatudu North, she will vote for change. This is not fickleness, it is the rationality of survival. Pillar 3, communal consensus. The sweet sob in the spaces between. The third pillar is communal consensus, which shatters the myth of the atomized individual voter. In Western democratic models, the secret ballot is a private affair. In Nyokavi's world, decision-making is deeply communal. The sweet sobs ensures that no woman votes alone. This consensus is votes forged in the spaces between the market spaces, the communal infrastructure, the church pews, and more importantly, in the chama. In these spaces, women sob together, sharing details of their struggles and vetting political aspirants. By the time Nukafi reaches the polling station, she carries a consensus that has been debated and defined over months of communal interaction. This communal vetting is the ultimate defense against manipulation because the decision is made collectively. It's anchored in shared experience. The sweet soap serves as a bridge, allowing women to recognize a shared interest in the preservation of their communal sweetness, regardless of ethnicity. The synthesis of Nukafi Wamwema's lived experience leads to a radical reassessment of Kenyan democracy. Wanjiku, far from being the caricature of an uneducated voter, is the master architect of Kenyan society. While the former state builds bypasses, railways, and grass-fronted offices that often serve as monuments of exclusion, Mukabi and her peers build an architecture of solidarity, an invisible infrastructure of care, trust, and shared lamentation that holds the nation together in the face of systemic collapse. When we observe Mukavi's perspectives that lead to the voting behavior, the lens of irrationality shatters. We do not see a sheep led by ethnic kingpins or the fear or allure of a handout. We see a strategic actor using the sweet soap as a tool of high-stake recognition. Her vote is a sophisticated communique to the horse of power, a demand that anthropy must end and that sweetness of her communal life must finally be reflected in the national policy. Wanjiku does not vote for a person. She votes for the survival of the architecture she has spent her life building. Her ballot is an architectural choice, a decision to reinforce the walls of the informal against the bitterness of a predatory state. To understand Kenyan democracy, one must stop listening to the speeches on the podium or from vehicle rooftops and start listening to the sweet sobs in the market. They are the true blueprints of the nation's survival toward a politics of sweetness. To move toward a governance model that respects the architecture of solidarity, the state must first institutionalize an economy of care by transitioning from an extractive relation with the informal sector to one of reciprocal support, which requires legal recognition of the commons through legislative frameworks that protect informal marketplaces and chama structures from arbitrary demolition, alongside universal social protection that designs social security and health insurance model to mirror the mutual aid practiced by women like Kafiwa Mwema, including disability inclusive infrastructure, both social and physical. Second, Policy should be evaluated not just by GDP growth alone, but the ability to mitigate anthropocene, which can be achieved through a Wanjiku audit requiring every major infrastructure project or economic policy to undergo an anthropocene impact assessment that measures displacement of marketplaces and the burden on family budgets, as well as through decentralized services that prioritize water, sanitation, healthcare, education, with communal spaces between where women live and work. That the civic engagement must respect communal consensus by adopting a marketplace pedagogy that works with existing solidarity networks, recognizing Sharma's reader market committees as legitimate political interlocutors, and by vetting political aspirants based on the demonstrated history of communal care rather than their ability to perform empathy on campaign trail, making Wanjiku's discernment the standard for leadership. Finally, bridging the formal and informal requires cooperative governance models that give informal collectives direct decision-making power over local resources, effectively commoning local government. Alongside gendered and disability-inclusive urban planning that ensures the light to the city for the Wanjiku trader, the mother, and the person with a disability through accessible infrastructure, secure market spaces, and house policies that prioritize community needs over commercial development. Ultimately, this recommendation called for the state to start building bridges to nowhere and instead build a home worthy of Wanjiku's resilience, recognizing that her sweet sobs are not cries for charity, but a call to order, reminding us that a nation is defined not by macroeconomic indicators, but by the strength of the bonds between its people. Thank you. My renewed and filled with hope